Japan has one of the deepest cryptid traditions on the planet, stretching back over 1,000 years, and most of it never gets talked about outside of Japan. From shapeshifting foxes to massive humanoids spotted in Antarctic waters, today we're breaking down every major cryptid in Japanese history and everything we know about them, starting with the oldest one on the list and the one that refuses to die. Kappa. This creature was first written about in the 8th century. Let that register for a second. The Nihon Ryoiki documented the Kappa over 1,200 years ago, making it one of the oldest continuously reported cryptids anywhere in the world. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. The physical description hasn't changed. Across 12 centuries and over 1,000 regional variants from different prefectures, the Kappa is always the same. Child-sized, roughly 3 to 5 feet tall, a turtle-like shell on its back, and a water-filled cavity on the top of its head. That cavity is everything, because every single account agrees that if you bow to a Kappa, it bows back, spills the water from its head, and loses all its power. 1,000 versions of this creature, spread across an entire country, and they all share the exact same weakness. That's either one incredibly successful campfire story or something weirder. The boring explanation is that parents invented the Kappa to scare children away from rivers, and honestly that tracks. But modern cryptozoologists aren't fully satisfied with that answer. Some theorize the Kappa was a misidentified river otter or primate. Others have floated the idea of a now extinct humanoid species living near Japanese waterways. Documentation peaked during the Edo period between 1603 and 1867, when regional record keeping was at its most thorough, and the consistency across those records is what keeps the debate alive today. But the Kappa is just the beginning, because Japan's next cryptid is smaller, stranger, and way harder to explain. Kudagitsune, tube fox. You've probably heard of the kitsune, Japan's famous shape-shifting fox spirit, but the Kudagitsune is something else entirely, and honestly, it's way weirder than its more famous cousin. This thing has been documented since at least the 12th century, and its whole deal is possessing horses and tormenting farming communities across central and western Japan. Farmers blamed it for everything: sick livestock, bad harvests, neighbors acting strange, all Kudagitsune. If someone in your village started behaving erratically, the explanation wasn't illness. It was a tiny fox spirit crawling inside their horse and spreading misfortune like a supernatural parasite. But here's where it gets genuinely bizarre. During the Edo period, local magistrates didn't just hear about these possession cases and shrug, they formally investigated them. We're talking actual government officials sitting down, interviewing witnesses, and writing up detailed case reports about a fox spirit possessing farm animals. There is a literal bureaucratic paper trail for this creature. Somewhere in Japan, there are filing cabinets worth of official documents that essentially read "Fox Ghost confirmed, case closed." Now, modern folklorists look at those same records and see something different. They argue these possession cases were likely early attempts to explain mental illness or neurological conditions in an era with zero medical framework for them, which makes the whole thing more tragic than funny. And the bigger question still hasn't been answered. Nobody can agree on whether the Kudagitsune is actually its own distinct creature or just a regional flavor of standard kitsune folklore with extra steps. It sits in this gray zone between cryptid and cultural variant, and centuries of documentation haven't settled the debate. But if a fox spirit with government paperwork sounds strange, wait until you hear about a snake that had actual bounties placed on its head. Tsuchinoko. There is a $750,000 bounty on a snake. Not a mythical dragon, not some kaiju-sized sea serpent. A snake. One that's barely the length of your forearm. The Tsuchinoko has been described in Japanese texts since the Muromachi period, going all the way back to the 1300s, and the description has barely changed in 700 years. It's short, somewhere between 30 and 80 centimeters, fat in the middle like it swallowed a tennis ball, and it has a triangular, hammer-shaped head that's distinctly wider than its body. That last detail is the one that makes actual herpetologists pay attention, because that head shape doesn't match any known Japanese snake species. Not even close. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't some fringe legend with a handful of campfire stories behind it. There are over 1,500 documented regional accounts of this thing, spread across different prefectures, different centuries, different witnesses who had zero contact with each other, and they all describe the same animal. The modern sighting wave kicked off in 1972 in Nagano Prefecture, and it escalated fast. By the 1980s and 1990s, Japanese cryptozoology associations were offering bounties of up to 100 million yen for a captured specimen. Universities launched actual research programs. Herpetologists treated it as a plausible unknown species well into the 2000s. This is the only Japanese cryptid that got that level of legitimate scientific attention. Funded expeditions, academic papers, the whole thing. And after all that, centuries of sightings, $750,000 on the table, organized hunts across multiple prefectures, and genuine university backing, there is zero physical evidence. No specimens, no usable photographs, no skeletal remains, nothing. 1,500 people across 7 centuries describe the same snake, and nobody has ever produced a body. That tension between overwhelming testimony and absolute physical absence is what keeps the Tsuchinoko alive as one of Japan's most fascinating cryptid cases. But if a missing snake sounds strange, wait until you hear about the monster living in one of Japan's most famous lakes, Issy. Everyone knows about Loch Ness, but Japan has its own lake monster, and the story behind it is stranger than anything Scotland ever produced. In 1961, fishermen on Lake Ishi in Gifu Prefecture started reporting something massive moving beneath the surface. We're talking 5 to 10 meters long, humped back, long neck, the whole plesiosaur package. But here's the detail that changes everything about this story. Just before the sightings began, a 6.6 magnitude earthquake rocked the same region. Some theorists believe the quake could have disturbed underground cave systems, potentially displacing species that had never been seen at the surface before. That reframes the entire phenomenon. This isn't just a monster legend, it's possibly a geological event with biological consequences. And the sightings didn't stop, they escalated. By the mid-1970s, over 300 encounters had been logged. But unlike your typical lake monster story where it's always some guy at 2 a.m., a significant number of Issy reports came from fishermen and longtime local residents, people whose livelihoods depended on knowing exactly what lived in that water. The Japanese response was equally unusual. Television networks and local authorities actually launched official observation expeditions in 1974 and 1975, making Issy one of the few cryptids in Japan to receive something close to government-backed investigation during its own sighting era. Cameras rolling, crews stationed lakeside, the whole production. But here's where it gets frustrating. Despite all of that organized effort, Issy produced zero physical evidence. No clear photographs, no sonar confirmation, no biological material, 300 witnesses, national TV expeditions, and absolutely nothing to show for it. At least Issy stayed in the water, though. The next cryptid on this list took to the mountains, and it looked disturbingly human. Japanese Bigfoot. In 1970, something walked out of the Hiba Mountains in Hiroshima Prefecture and terrified an entire country. Standing 6 to 7 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown fur, walking upright on 2 legs. Japan had its own Bigfoot, and they called it Hibagon. But here's where it gets absurd. Over 100 sightings were reported in a single month in 1972. Not over a year, not over a decade, 1 month, in the Hiroshima region alone. Between 1970 and 1975, more than 250 total encounters were documented, and Japanese newspapers covered Hibagon with the same intensity that North American media gave Bigfoot. This wasn't fringe, it was national news for years. And then it just stopped. After 1975, sightings dropped off a cliff and never recovered. No skeletal remains, no fur samples, no usable photographs, no footprint casts, nothing. 5 years of constant encounters and then complete silence. Here's the thing, the skeptic argument is genuinely uncomfortable for believers. Bigfoot media coverage started reaching Japan in the late 1960s. Within 2 years, Japan suddenly has its own version of the exact same creature in one concentrated geographic area during a specific window of time. That's textbook imported mass hysteria. You see the monster on TV, you start seeing the monster in your mountains, but enthusiasts push back hard. They argue the concentrated geography actually supports a real population. A hoax spreads everywhere. An actual animal stays in one area. The tight clustering of sightings around the Hiba Mountains looks less like panic and more like a territory. The problem is neither side can explain the ending. Populations don't just vanish overnight, but neither does mass hysteria. Not that cleanly. Whatever Hibagan was, it disappeared like someone flipped a switch. And if a vanishing ape man sounds unsettling, wait until you hear about the woman who asks you a question you cannot safely answer. Slip-mouthed woman. Everything we've talked about so far has roots in ancient texts, regional folklore, or at least some kind of biological plausibility. This one has none of that. Kuchisake Anna first showed up around 1979, and she didn't crawl out of a lake or stomp through a forest. She spread through school playgrounds, kids whispering to each other at recess. That's her origin story. The legend goes like this. A woman wearing a surgical mask approaches you on the street and asks a simple question. Am I pretty? If you say yes, she removes the the mask to reveal a mouth slit from ear to ear and asks again. If you say no, she kills you. If you say yes the second time, she cuts your face to match hers. But here's where it gets fascinating. The legend comes with built-in survival rules, like a horror game with actual mechanics. You can tell her she looks average, which apparently short circuits her logic. You can throw candy at her and run while she's distracted. You can ask her if you're pretty, which supposedly confuses her long enough for you to escape. This isn't a creature people genuinely believed was lurking in the mountains. This is a legend designed to be retold, tested, and dared. And unlike literally every other entry on this list, we can track exactly when she was born. No ancient scrolls, no Edo period woodblock prints. She emerged from 1970s school culture, faded, then came roaring back during the internet waves of the 2000s and 2010s. Her revival cycles map almost perfectly onto when online creepypasta communities exploded. Some people argue the surgical mask detail ties into Japanese medical culture, but nobody has found a confirmed historical precursor. She's a fully modern creation. Whether she technically counts as a cryptid is debatable. Whether she's one of the most effectively terrifying urban legends ever created is not. But if a woman with a question and a mask unsettles you, wait until you hear about something lurking in the mountains that nobody can explain away this easily. Takataro. You've probably never heard of this one. And honestly, that's the entire point. Takataro is a bipedal humanoid cryptid reported in the mountainous regions of Nagano Prefecture, standing somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown fur. Sounds like a classic ape-man sighting, right? It checks every single box. But here's what makes Takataro genuinely fascinating. Fewer than 50 sightings have ever been documented, total, across 4 decades. To put that in perspective, Habagon racked up over 250 reported encounters in just 5 years. Takataro couldn't manage 50 in 40, but the timing is what makes this interesting. Takataro sightings began appearing in the early 1980s, right as Hibagon encounters were tapering off in Hiroshima. Some cryptozoologists have pointed to this overlap and suggested a southward population shift, that maybe the same creature migrated deeper into Japan's mountain ranges. But there's a much simpler explanation that nobody wants to say out loud. It wasn't the creature that moved south. It was the story. One regional legend fades, another one fills the vacuum. Same description, different prefecture. And unlike Hibagon, which landed in newspapers and sparked organized search expeditions, Takataro never broke through. It was collected almost entirely through local oral history and regional folklore surveys. No TV crews, no bounties, no national panic. It just quietly existed in the mountains of Nagano, told by locals and written down by folklorists who happened to be listening. By the 2000s, newer legends had completely overshadowed it. Takataro had every ingredient a cryptid needs to go viral. The size, the mystery, the remote mountain setting, and it still didn't, which raises a question worth sitting with. What separates the legends that spread from the ones that don't? Because it clearly isn't evidence. Sometimes the most interesting thing about a cryptid isn't what it is. It's why nobody cares. But if Takataro is Japan's quietest humanoid mystery, the next entry is its loudest nightmare, because nothing prepares you for a dog with a human face. Jinmenken. Picture this. You're driving down a Tokyo highway at 2 a.m., headlights cutting through fog, and you see a dog trotting along the shoulder. Normal enough. But then it turns to look at you, and it has a human face. Not a vaguely human-shaped snout. A full human face. Human eyes, a human nose, a human mouth. Staring at you with an expression that says absolutely nothing. That's the Jinmenken, and it might be the most skin-crawling thing on this entire list. Here's what makes it worse. The Jinmenken doesn't attack. It doesn't growl, doesn't chase your car, doesn't bare its teeth. It just looks at you, silent, calm, almost bored, and somehow that's 1,000 times more terrifying than if it lunged at your window. An aggressive creature you can fight, a creature that simply exists with your face on its body. You just have to live with that image forever. But here's where the Jinmenken gets really interesting, and it has nothing to do with the creature itself. Every cryptid we've covered so far has roots in oral tradition, regional folklore, centuries of accumulated storytelling. The Jinmenken has none of that. Its entire origin traces back to Japanese paranormal websites and forums between 2000 and 2005. Anonymous posts, unverifiable accounts. Zero photographs, zero physical evidence, zero connection to any historical folklore tradition. This is a cryptid born on the internet. Skeptics point to pareidolia, your brain's hardwired tendency to see human faces in things that aren't faces. Headlights hit a stray dog at a weird angle, your brain fills in the rest. Others argue the clustering of sightings on the same handful of forums suggests coordinated fiction rather than independent encounters. And honestly, both explanations are more convincing than anything the believers have offered. But that almost makes the Jinmenkin more fascinating. The Kappa took 1,200 years of oral tradition across 1,000 prefectures to become legend. The Jinmenkin did it with forum posts in 5 years. That says something profound about how mythology gets made in the modern world. Still, at least the Jinmenkin stays on land where you can see it coming. The next cryptid lives somewhere you'll never be able to look, deep beneath the Antarctic Ocean. Ningen, human. Picture a human being stretched to the size of a blue whale. Pale white skin, no hair, no features, just a massive featureless humanoid shape drifting through Antarctic waters. That's the Ningen, and at 20 to 30 meters long, it would be one of the largest living things on the planet. But here's where it gets interesting. The Ningen doesn't come from ancient scrolls or mountain village folklore, it comes from a 2007 forum post. The story goes like this. Japanese whaling research crews operating in Antarctic waters allegedly spotted something enormous and vaguely human-shaped surfacing near their vessels. The accounts were posted anonymously on Japanese paranormal message boards, and within weeks, the Ningen had a name, a physical description, and a growing mythology. But the alleged whaling crew documentation has never been verified against any official expedition records. No government agency, no marine biology institution, no research body of any kind has ever acknowledged its existence. The evidence begins and ends with anonymous internet posts. And that's not a flaw in the legend, that is the legend. Peak interest ran from 2007 to 2010, then surged again in the mid-2010s and early 2020s. If that timeline sounds familiar, it should, because it tracks internet culture hype cycles almost perfectly. The Ningen didn't spread through fishing villages or get passed down through generations. It spread through shares, reposts, and creepypasta threads. Here's the thing. Some of the people engaging with the Ningen knew it was fiction. They participated anyway, adding details, refining the lore, treating it like collaborative world building. Others genuinely believed they were documenting an undiscovered deep sea species. The line between those two groups was never clear, and nobody involved seemed particularly interested in drawing one. That ambiguity is what makes the Ningen the most conceptually fascinating entry on this entire list. Every other cryptid we've covered emerged from centuries of sightings, agricultural fears, or schoolyard whispers. The Ningen was assembled from scratch by strangers on the internet, given a shape, given a name, and then believed. It's not just a cryptid, it's proof that mythology doesn't need history. It just needs a platform. But if a creature born entirely from forum posts can captivate millions, wait until you hear about a cryptid that's been hiding in plain sight in rural Japan, with actual witnesses who'll swear on their lives it's real. Shonai, snake. Tsuchinoko has over 1,500 documented sightings, university expeditions, and bounty programs offering the equivalent of $750,000 for a captured specimen. The Shonai snake has fewer than 20 sightings. No national media coverage, no bounties, no expeditions. Nobody outside Yamagata Prefecture has ever cared about this thing. But here's the thing, both are giant snakes that shouldn't exist in Japan. The Shonai snake has been reported in the mountain streams and rivers of Yamagata's Shonai region since the 1980s. Fishermen and hikers describing a serpent 3 to 5 meters long, standard body shape, no hammerhead, no bizarre proportions, just an enormous snake living in places where no snake that size has any business being. And here's where it gets interesting. Regional scholars have actually noted that the Shonai region's geography, dense mountainous river systems fed by snowmelt, is theoretically more hospitable to an unknown large serpent population than almost anywhere else these kinds of cryptids get reported. The habitat actually checks out, but nobody came to look. That's the real lesson the Shonai snake teaches. It's not about whether the creature is real. It's about what makes one legend explode and another stay invisible. Tsuchinoko got picked up by national media, turned into a cultural phenomenon, slapped onto merchandise. The Shonai snake got logged in a regional folklore collection that nobody outside those mountains ever opened. And that's what cryptids actually look like when no one is watching. Not bounty hunts and TV specials, just a fisherman telling his neighbor about something massive he saw moving upstream, and his neighbor nodding, and neither of them ever writing it down anywhere that matters. Japan has been generating these stories for over 1,000 years, from river demons that bow politely when you greet them, to 30-meter pale humanoids haunting Antarctic waters, to a snake in a mountain river that fewer than 20 people have ever reported seeing. And the Shonai snake suggests something genuinely unsettling. There are probably dozens more sitting in regional archives, in folders nobody opens, in conversations between hikers that never made it past the trailhead. The unknown isn't always in Antarctica or on the evening news. Sometimes it's just upstream. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.